I'm Edward Warfield. I'm the publisher of CityBiz. I'm honored today to interview Kevin Hrusovsky, the CEO of Quanterix. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you, Edwin. Nice to be here.
Can you provide an explanation of biomarkers, the goal of advancing precision health, and a snapshot of Quanterix today?
It's magical, Edwin. Basically, we can look inside of non-invasive samples from the body and tell you how healthy you are, as well as how potentially diseased you are long before symptoms. And, there's a lot more promise to come, but we've already begun to make a lot of advances, particularly in the area of neurology, where we can actually see brain health from your blood, which is an incredible advance.
And so can you give us sort of a snapshot of where Quanterix today is in terms of employees? You're obviously public. Yeah, just a sort of a quick snapshot of where you are today.
Yeah, we probably have around 300 employees, probably another 300 or 400 that support us through our partners, that we do some of our work through partners. We went public about 2.5 years ago. We went out at 15. We're currently trading above 40, and we're growing very rapidly. And we've been helping companies get drugs approved basically by using these biomarkers to recruit patients in before they have symptoms, when it's easier for the drugs to be effective. And the FDA has actually further supported us in this endeavor to try to allow particularly some of the drugs where there's been really a major challenge getting approvals, like Alzheimer's disease. There's none today that's been approved. And so being able to see Alzheimer patients as much as 15 to 20 years before they get dementia significantly changes the complexity of the disease. It's much simpler if you can catch it really early. And just like in cancers and infectious disease, like with COVID, we're into these areas where we can see these diseases long before there's symptoms. And we think that that's the key to changing medicine.
Can you tell us how Quanterix has pivoted and responded to COVID-19?
Yeah, it's been interesting because the world has desperately had issues with testing, and it still does. In fact, you're seeing major relapses occurring around the world and even in the United States. And one of the challenges is much of the testing is telling people they don't have it when they actually do have it. And a lot of times it tells them they have it when they don't have it. So you have a lot of challenge today with public policy being based on testing that's erroneous. And so there's a lot of challenges today in making sure that the public policy is taking into account some of the fine print on the testing. And much of it is really only valid when there are already symptoms. And many times it's many days after the symptoms start when the test can be accurate. So this is an area of a lot of challenge for the world right now. And so we entered with the idea that maybe we could see the virus earlier before symptoms, or more importantly, we think almost half the people today have the virus and never get symptoms. And so if the testing never works for those people and they tell them that they basically don't have the virus, they could be behaving in a way that spread the virus. And so we have seen recently with Chris Christie and our president, and even Kamala Harris, there's been in some of the NFL teams, there's been a lot of false positives and a lot of challenges that they think that they're protected and they think that they're taking all the right public policy steps. But unfortunately, until testing really advances and gets scaled up so that more people can be tested, as well as more precision in the testing, so that if you are testing a lot of people without symptoms, that we're appropriately guiding them to what their real state is. So this is an area that we pivoted into, and we've now been discovered by the NIH and by the CDC and FDA. And so we're pretty excited that our disruptive biomarker technologies now are actually potentially going to play a major role, we hope, in helping advance the ability to see these viruses early and with more precision.
Can you describe the role of your technology, Simoa?
Yeah, so Simoa stands for single molecule array, and basically we're able to see single molecules of proteins, which is about 1,000 to 100,000 times more sensitive than what the traditional technologies were able to see. And so it's kind of like putting a high-powered microscope that's enabling you to see something that you couldn't see before. And we're doing that to these proteins in blood. And so it started, as we pointed out, with neurology, where people thought that you really could only see brain health by viewing the solution called the cerebral spinal fluid, which is the solution that surrounds the brain and is in the spine. Everyone thought that the proteins related to the brain would only be in that solution. But what we have found, because of our exquisite sensitivity, that there is a permeation of those proteins from the CSF, the cerebral spinal fluid, into blood. And so the concentration, however, in blood is so low that no one really could measure it before, but we can. And now there's been a lot of correlations that we've been able to create. And even in COVID, one of the big areas of issue is loss of taste and loss of smell, which is a neurological issue. And there's a lot of brain fog and concern that for the next 10, 15 years, we might have increased rates of Alzheimer's, increased rates of MS, ALS, Parkinson's, as a result of the COVID having neurodegeneration on the people that even don't have symptoms other than maybe loss of taste and smell. So we're now honing in with a lot of our neurological markers, even in COVID, to better understand the long-term impact of what COVID might be doing to the world and to many of those that we think are only experiencing asymptomatic virus. So the other area is the innate immune system. We spend a lot of time measuring cytokines. And as you know, many of the people that have died from COVID have had what's called a cytokine storm, where the immune system's trying to fight the virus and it has a runaway of the immune system, ends up fighting the body instead of fighting the virus, and ends up creating pneumonia and putting people on ventilators and they died. So our ability to see these cytokines at very early stages has allowed many of the physicians to better track and understand whether someone is going to go lethal because of the runaway immune system, or if they're going to be able to control their virus with their immune system. And so now there's a lot of new, I'll call them drug agents too, that they're trying to deploy to fix the immune system so that it properly works against the virus. There's also a lot of new vaccines that are coming that are an attempt to work with the adaptive immune system to try to have it fight the virus before you even get it. And so a lot of new questions are starting to arise around the durability of those vaccines. How long will they last? Will you ever be able to get infection again once you've had the infection? So there's a lot of unanswered questions that we think these newer technologies around the immune system, as well as on the virus and on the actual neuro systems, are going to be important to unraveling many of the mysteries of COVID.
In the first week of October, Quanterix announced an $18 million contract with NIH to help accelerate the development of the COVID antigen test. Can you tell us the significance of this partnership?
Yeah, so first of all, just in the grander scheme of things, antigen is the protein of the virus. And there are these things that are called the recipes of the virus, which are more like DNA and RNA. And most of the testing today has been looking at the recipes, like the DNA and the RNA. The antigen, though, is the actual virus that's starting to replicate the protein called an antigen. And so we're measuring that actual antigen, which is very different than measuring the recipe, which may or may not end up yielding the actual protein. And that's why some of the challenges with testing today. So we are able to see that antigen with a lot of precision. And so the NIH has uncovered that. They did a feasibility work with us. They gave us $2 million, and we were able to work through a lot of the key criteria that showcase this advance. And as a result of that advance, they're asking us now to scale up manufacturing for it with the funds that they're giving us. So we're beginning to scale up as we are also trying to work with the FDA to ensure that we have the right precision, specificity, and sensitivity on the test to further advance the ability to see the virus better than it's being seen today.
And another deal that you announced earlier this month was the licensing agreement with Abbott Labs. Can you tell us about that partnership? Can you go into a little more detail on
Sure.
what that looks like?
It's interesting, Ed, when there's these large, very large diagnostic houses. One of them is Abbott, another is Roche, another Siemens. These are considered the very large big three that do what's called distributed IVDs. And there's also large companies like LabCorp and Quest that are more reference labs. That's a different part of the diagnostic value chain. But Abbott decided that they would license our Simoa technology, that single molecule array, to start incorporating it into their technologies. And in exchange for that, they would give us an upfront payment as well as a royalty stream for utilizing our technology. And so that is a new advance that just was announced. And we also did a license on our actual antibodies that measures the neurodegeneration with Siemens, another one of those big three companies, about a year ago for the specific NFL neurofilament light that does measure in blood the neurodegeneration of the brain. So we've now got a couple different licenses with two of those three largest diagnostic houses, Roche being the other that's a large customer, and maybe someday we'll have advances with them as well. But we also have very strong relationships with LabCorp and Quest, and they have our technology. And we think that in the end, we want to be able to permeate as fast as possible to help patients as quickly as possible with our technologies. And so independent of Quanterix, we also formed this, we'll call it a foundation, a nonprofit, that's sole purpose is to try to accelerate these disruptive technologies so they can get to patients quicker and sooner, and not only help with early detection for getting drugs approved that haven't been approved to date, but then secondarily, someday use biomarkers to actually prevent diseases by the way we live our lives. The foods that we eat, the exercise that we have, the amount of radiation that we get exposed to, whether we smoke, whether we drink, all of those are environmental triggers that more so than what you're born with are what causes disease. And so many of the biomarkers that we're working on will actually help you empower yourself to be able to live your life in a way that you're staying away from triggering disease by the way you manage your environmental triggers.
Can you talk a little bit about the PPH network, which is the powering precision health ecosystem, and what is the significance of it in terms of your rollout?
Yeah, so Powering Precision Health is that nonprofit foundation, and the real secret to that is having representation from all components of the broader ecosystem that would be needed in order to accelerate very rapidly getting testing technologies to patients and or to prevention. And so that means that we have not just the top thought leaders and disruptive innovators in the world are part of it, but we also reach out to policymakers like the FDA themselves, the CDC, the NIH. We also reach out to the advocacy groups, for instance, the Susan Komen Foundation for, let's say, breast cancer. We want to make sure that if we have a way to see breast cancer much better than today's mammogram through, say, a blood test, that those advocacy groups get exposure to it so they can further inspire and motivate the scientists that are working on it. We also invite investors who fund many of these developments. And so we try to get to all aspects of the ecosystem so that if we can get everybody inspired, we'll then have all of the ingredients to truly accelerate the pace of these advances. And in this case, right now, the PPH ecosystem is alive and well and does have all of those components to it. And it's allowed many of the companies that have technologies to basically connect into it and accelerate the pace that they can then advance their own technologies, either through funding, investor funding, or through commercialization of getting to the thought leaders that are actually running the studies that are helping patients.
So I spent quite a bit of time on your recent earnings call report getting my arms around it. And it was the simple part of the story was execution versus aspiration. So, where Quanterix is today in terms of high probability drug development, and then you've got these aspirations of becoming sort of high value diagnostic and health service. Can you tell us your execution and your aspirations for Quanterix?
Yeah, so one of the things that we've watched over the years, and we have a strong investor following, is that you don't want to, in any level, create expectations that you can't fulfill. Because if you do, then you disappoint the investors. And so over the years, we've been very careful on the execution side of our business to ensure that whatever it is that we proclaim we're going to be able to do, that we're able to do it. And so initially, we started building Quanterix towards what's unregulated and doesn't require reimbursement, which is the research side of the business. It's a much lower risk place where it's easier to execute without a lot of surprises. And so for the last 4 or 5 years, we've been growing that from no revenue up to 60 million, and it's growing very rapidly at a 30 to 40% CAGR over like a 3-year period. So that ascent seems to be very manageable, and we call that the execution side of our business. The aspirational side is when we start to replace some of those big ticket imaging capabilities or start to move into diagnostics where you can see things better than other ways of doing it, and you create a lot of growth very rapidly. And that's where the Abbotts and the Siemens and many of these advances with LabCorp and Quest, those are all the more what we call diagnostic aspirational side of our business. We don't want to call that execution yet because there's still too many variables that we have to make sure that we manage appropriately so that we don't mislead investors that this is something that they can expect. We still see a lot of promise here in a much more significant way, maybe 10 times the value creation, but yet it's still very early stage. And so that's why we call it aspirational. And we're making a lot of advances because of COVID onto that aspirational side that none of us expected to be advancing this quickly. And so that's been one of the things that's been interesting about our company is even though we've pivoted to try to help the world, it's also helping our investors see the aspirational opportunities in a little bit clearer lens.
And so how is Quanterix poised to disrupt healthcare?
You know, basically, at the simplest level, if you can see disease long before there are symptoms, and you can do it non-invasively through just a simple blood test or a saliva test, what happens is that there's no longer challenges with people getting tested to see these diseases earlier. And so one of the key areas we've advanced as part of COVID in the last 6 months is we've teamed up with one of the largest payer groups of America, where they are providing healthcare services and they're paying for those services. And they have now seen the greatness, if you can see these diseases non-invasively before symptoms, that it could transform the healthcare costs. Because if you can, for instance, see pancreatic cancer at a time when surgery could completely eliminate it versus it being lethal, or you can find a biomarker that will allow you to get an Alzheimer drug approved because of what it can tell the FDA about the clinical benefit of the drug itself long before symptoms. These are transformational ways that you can change the expenditure for healthcare, but more importantly, extend life expectancy, because you're going to be eliminating a lot of the diseases that used to be lethal and turn them into more chronic ailments that there are going to be solutions. And so we actually think the advances with the payer group this year have been very formidable and set up a long-term opportunity to very easily identify how we can transform healthcare. We were just having a discussion today, even around type 1 diabetes. It's become somewhat of an epidemic in the United States and the world. And if we can diagnose that maybe 5 years before you actually have the cascade of type 1 diabetes, long before you need insulin, there are measures that you can take that could actually potentially prevent type 1 diabetes from ever happening. And so if by early detection, very early detection, you can start to see these diseases and eliminate them, you can see how revolutionary that would be to extending life expectancy and also reducing substantially the cost of healthcare.
So you're the founder of Powering Precision Health, which is an annual summit focused on the advancement of precision health. Can you tell us how you got involved in that and your vision for it and its impact?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. First of all, I'm blessed to be around a lot of scientists over my career that are really the ones that are advancing the ball down the field. They're the ones that are making inventions that are truly able to disrupt. But the challenge sometimes is getting those inventions onto a stage that investors can see it, that other thought leaders can see it to use it, and to really get the technology to move the needle. And so I actually spent most of my career in what's called DNA and RNA, which are those recipes for the protein, and learned that, the protein is actually more important to the relevance and the significance of disease than the DNA and RNA. the DNA and RNA in the identical twin studies are interesting because both twins are born with the recipe, but yet one of them ends up getting cancer when the other one gets, let's say, Alzheimer's. What is it? Well, it's the way you live your life, and it's the protein that actually differentiates more so than the DNA and RNA. So that's why we really honed in on Powering Precision Health on going after all the protein technologies and the wearable devices that might be able to provide us keen insights earlier stage. And now we do think molecular, these DNA and RNA play a role too. So it's kind of getting them all working together. And my view was, let's go focus on that and try to change the world in a positive way by really leaving a major impact on transforming healthcare by seeing disease earlier and allowing people to then live a life not in fear of premature death based on not knowing what's going on inside their body. And so we've made a lot of advances there. And that's then led us to the companies that then have the technologies that really can achieve what that vision is for powering precision health. And so it's an ecosystem that naturally, symbiotically sits with many companies to try to fuel their growth, and then their growth actually fuels the ability to aspire to the vision of what precision health can do for the world.
And so 5 to 10 years out, where is precision health in terms of oncology, neurology, cardiology, inflammation, and infectious disease? Where do you think you're gonna make the most progress?
Well, hey, I would say the immune system has most of us most fascinated right now, because the immune system is what is at the basis of attacking things that really are intended to take you down. So when you have a foreign substance or a disease of some sort, the immune system typically is what gets triggered. The inflammation that the immune system creates is an attempt to fight off whatever it is that you've received. And I think that we're most excited about how the immune system and different drug agents and different ways of watching the immune system might be able to further highlight earlier what might be going on in the body at a time when you can still deal with it. And some of these new cancer agents are basically cancer found a way to trick the immune system so that the immune system couldn't see it. And so your natural responses to fight cancer really weren't working. And so now some of these newer drugs, these immunotherapies, are intended to put markers on those cancers so that the immune system can see it and then fight it. And so these are pretty profound advances. And so I think in the end, the inflammation and the immune system will probably be part of cardiology. It'll be part of neurology. It'll be part of infectious disease. Just about every ailment will probably have some linkages back into the immune system, either the adaptive or the innate immune systems. And so I would say that will probably be the front and center piece of this for the next 10 years. And I do think that all of us will start to evolve to a place where we'll be more empowered to manage our own health journeys and not rely so heavily on doctors trying to predict what's going on with us based on them interpreting our symptoms. That whole field of symptomatic medicine could get replaced with asymptomatic medicine or pre-symptomatic, where you actually are starting to read biomarkers and understanding with your wearables what's going on in your body long before you get symptoms. Because we all know that by the time you get symptoms, many times it's too late and you end up having to tell people goodbye too soon. And so our whole goal here is to see if we can transform healthcare over the next 10 years to this early, interaction with these diseases, so that we can even get better drugs, better therapies, and or prevent the disease in the way we live our lives.
Kevin, I want to thank you for sharing your time and your vision. It's exciting to see a company really in the center of disrupting healthcare, which desperately needs to be disrupted. So we wish you the best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Evan. We got an incredible group of people that are fighting for this, and we really thank you for taking the time with us today.